A young woman steps on to the next big star stage, hands shaking, eyes full of fear. When she opens her mouth to sing, no sound comes. The host moves to escort her off, but then Keanu Reeves stands up, walks to the stage, and whispers one line that changes everything. The entire world stops to listen. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The bright studio lights of Next Big Star beamed across a sea of faces. The crowd buzzed with excitement, their applause echoing through the air. It was one of those nights when dreams were born or broken under the glare of cameras. The audience cheered for the previous contestant, a confident young man who had just finished a flashy rendition of a pop hit. He waved proudly before walking off stage, soaking in the spotlight one last time. Then, in the sudden hush that followed, a new name was called. Next up, Emily Dawson from Portland, Oregon. The words hung in the air as a slender young woman stepped into the light. She looked fragile, her shoulders slightly hunched, clutching the microphone with both trembling hands. Her soft brown hair fell around her face like a curtain, almost hiding her from the world. The camera zoomed in on her nervous smile. In her eyes was something different, less ambition, more fear. The kind of fear that wasn't just about stage fright, but something deeper. Behind the panel of judges sat Keanu Reeves, quiet and composed, dressed in a simple black blazer. He leaned forward slightly, sensing something in her expression. To his left, pop singer Lana Grace adjusted her earpiece, whispering to the host that the girl looked terrified. The audience, still full of energy, clapped politely, waiting for the music to begin. Ryan Hale, the show's charismatic host, gave a friendly nod toward Emily. "Take a deep breath, sweetheart, whenever you're ready." The lights dimmed slightly, and soft piano notes filled the room. Emily raised the microphone to her lips, her fingers trembling against the cold metal. But as the first verse approached, nothing came out. Her lips moved, but her voice betrayed her. Seconds ticked by, long, heavy seconds that filled the room like silence before a storm. The pianist faltered, unsure whether to continue. Whispers spread through the audience. Someone in the back laughed softly, a cruel, nervous sound that echoed louder than it should have. Ryan shifted awkwardly on his feet, glancing toward the producers off stage. "Do you need a moment?" he asked carefully. Emily didn't respond. Her breathing quickened, her chest rising and falling like she was running out of air. Her eyes darted between the judges and the crowd, her throat tightening with panic. The stage lights seemed to burn brighter, hotter. Every camera felt like 1,000 eyes staring straight through her. Ryan turned toward the judges, lowering his microphone slightly as he whispered, "We might need to move on." Lana Grace nodded sympathetically. "It happens sometimes," she murmured. "Stage fright." But Keanu didn't move. He was studying Emily's face. There was something in her eyes, something that told him this was more than just nerves. It was as if she was fighting a battle no one else could see. Emily took a step back, shaking her head, whispering to herself, "I can't do this." Her voice was barely audible, but the microphone caught every fragile word. Ryan took a step forward, reaching out a hand. "It's okay. You can try again another day." That was the moment Keanu stood up. The crowd gasped softly. The cameras swung toward him, zooming in on his calm, steady expression. He walked from the judges' table toward the stage, each step slow, deliberate, and silent against the floor. The entire studio seemed to hold its breath. Emily looked up, startled, as Keanu climbed the steps and crossed the stage toward her. He stopped a few feet away, his voice low and soothing. "Hi," he said simply, offering a small smile. "It's all right." She tried to speak, but no words came out. He gestured toward a stool nearby and sat down beside her. The crowd watched in complete silence, unsure whether this was scripted or real. The production crew exchanged confused glances, but no one dared interrupt. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his tone gentle but clear. "You know," he said, "no one here needs to hear a perfect voice. They just want to hear your heart." Emily's lower lip trembled. Tears began to fill her eyes. For the first time that night, the lights didn't seem so harsh. They looked softer somehow, like the world was finally exhaling. The pianist looked toward the judge's table for direction. Keanu gave a small nod. "Let's give her a moment," he said. Emily looked down at the microphone in her hand. It no longer felt like a weapon of fear, but a bridge she could cross if she chose to. Keanu sat quietly beside her, his presence calm, patient, grounding. The audience didn't make a sound. Even the cameras seemed to freeze. It was as if time had stopped to let her decide whether to stay silent or to try again. She took a slow, trembling breath. Her eyes glistened under the lights. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "My mom used to say the same thing." Keanu nodded slowly, his eyes soft with understanding. The crowd couldn't hear the full conversation, but they could feel it, the connection between two souls who understood silence better than applause. The music began again, faintly, like a second chance unfolding in real time. And then, as the final chord hung in the air, Emily lifted her head, tears still shining. The screen faded to black, leaving one haunting question in the air. Who was this girl? And why couldn't she sing? Emily stood frozen, under the glare of the lights, unable to move. The crowd's whispers grew sharper, cutting into her like knives. A man in the front row shook his head, muttering that this was embarrassing. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every tremble, every tear threatening to fall. Ryan Hale looked torn. His instinct was to protect the show's rhythm, not the person breaking within it. He took one cautious step forward. "It's okay, Emily," he said, voice low but tense. "We can stop here if you need." She stared at the floor, shame flooding her cheeks. For a moment, it looked like she might run. Then Keanu's chair scraped softly against the stage floor. The sound stopped everything. Every whisper died. He walked forward, not as a judge or celebrity, but as someone who understood pain. When he reached her, he didn't touch her shoulder or force her to speak. He simply sat beside her on the edge of the stage. "You don't have to be perfect," he said gently. "You just have to be real." Emily looked up, her breath catching. Her lip trembled. A tear rolled down her face, glittering under the hot stage lights. Keanu's eyes were steady, patient. The entire studio seemed to shrink to the quiet space between them. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, with a trembling voice, she whispered, "Can I try again?" The audience held its breath, waiting. The pianist glanced toward the judge's table. Keanu gave a calm nod, his expression a quiet reassurance. The first soft notes drifted through the studio once more. Emily gripped the microphone tighter, her knuckles pale. Her first breath shook, but this time she didn't stop. A single note escaped her lips, fragile, uncertain, but real. The sound trembled through the air like a whisper from a wounded soul. Then another note followed, and another, weaving into a melody that seemed to come from somewhere far inside her. The audience sat completely still. Even the cameras seemed reluctant to move, afraid to break the fragile moment forming before them. Emily's voice cracked once, then steadied. She sang a line about losing light, about finding it again through love and courage. Every word felt lived, not performed. Keanu's eyes softened as he watched her reclaim what fear had stolen. When the music faded, the silence was so complete, it felt sacred. Then, one by one, people began to rise from their seats. Applause erupted loud, raw, full of relief. Emily covered her mouth, overwhelmed by the sound. Keanu stood beside her, smiling gently. He leaned closer and whispered, "Thank you for being brave." Her tears finally fell, but this time, they weren't from fear. They were from release. As the lights dimmed and the crowd continued cheering, one lingering question echoed in every viewer's heart. Who was this girl, and what pain had silenced her for so long? The story of Emily Dawson began far away from the glowing lights of Los Angeles, in a small apartment tucked above a quiet street in Portland. The apartment was filled with sunlight and soft music that her mother, Claire, loved to play in the mornings. They didn't have much, but what they lacked in money, they made up for in laughter and warmth. On weekends, the two would sit together on the small balcony, painting the sunrise over the city rooftops. Her mother would hum softly while Emily mixed colors, always choosing shades that felt alive: deep blues, soft pinks, and bursts of gold. Those mornings were everything to Emily. She remembered how her mother's laughter could make even the gray Portland rain feel like a song. It was during one of those peaceful mornings that her mother first noticed Emily's voice. "You sing like the rain," she said with a smile. "Gentle, but it touches everything." From that moment, music became their bond. Her mother would play old records on a scratched stereo, and Emily would sing along, her voice pure and untrained. They sang while cooking dinner, while folding laundry, while painting. There was always sound in that little home. But everything changed one evening in late autumn. The rain came heavier than usual. Her mother had gone out to pick up groceries before Emily's upcoming school performance. Emily remembered watching the clock tick, wondering why it was taking so long. Then came the knock on the door. 2 police officers stood there, faces solemn under the flickering hallway light. Their voices blurred as they explained. There had been an accident, a drunk driver. She was gone instantly. The world fell silent. The next morning, the apartment felt colder than ever before. The sunlight no longer reached the corners. The stereo sat untouched. The paintbrushes dried stiff in their jars. Emily sat on the balcony, staring at the horizon they used to paint together. For the first time, she couldn't hear a single note of music in her head. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Her voice faded, her laughter disappeared, and her world shrank to 4 walls and a worn-out couch. Friends stopped calling. Neighbors stopped knocking. The world outside her window continued moving, but she stood still, caught in a moment that refused to pass. Her school counselor suggested therapy, and reluctantly, Emily went. Her therapist, Dr. Alvarez, was kind but firm. During their sessions, she often asked about the music, about the singing, about the colors Emily used to paint. But every time Emily tried to speak about them, her throat tightened. It was as if her voice had been buried with her mother. One afternoon, after another session filled with silence, Dr. Alvarez leaned forward. "Emily," she said gently, "sometimes the way back to yourself is through the things that once made you feel alive. You don't have to perform. You just have to begin again." Emily nodded, but she didn't believe it. How could she sing when every note reminded her of what she lost? Winter came to Portland and stayed. The rain turned to a quiet mist that clung to Emily's windows, blurring the world outside. Most days, she stayed in bed, scrolling through old photos on her phone, pictures of her and her mother covered in paint, laughing, singing into wooden spoons like microphones. Each image hurt to look at, but she couldn't stop. They were proof that once she'd known happiness. Her best friend Mara visited often. Mara was her opposite, bold, outspoken, and full of life. She'd known Emily since childhood, when they used to sneak into the school auditorium after hours just to sing on stage for fun. Now, when Mara knocked, Emily barely opened the door. She'd mumble something about not feeling well, but Mara always stepped inside anyway, bringing food or warm tea, refusing to leave her alone. One afternoon, Mara dropped a flyer on the kitchen table. The paper was bright orange, standing out in the dull gray of the apartment. "Next big star open auditions in Portland," it read. Emily shook her head. Immediately. "No, I can't." Mara crossed her arms. "You used to love singing. You said it made you feel close to her." "That was before," Emily whispered. Her voice cracked on the last word. Mara's expression softened. "You don't have to win anything. Just go. Maybe it's your way back." Emily didn't respond. Her eyes fell on the flyer again. The idea felt impossible, but a tiny part of her, buried beneath the weight of grief, wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, singing again could help her breathe. That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing her mother's voice echo in memory. "You sing like the rain." The words repeated until tears rolled quietly down her cheeks. She sat up and opened the small wooden box beside her bed. Inside were her mother's belongings, a dried paintbrush, an old cassette tape, and a silver locket. She held the locket in her hand, feeling the cool metal against her skin. It had a tiny engraving on the back, "Always believe." Emily closed her fist around it and whispered, "I'm trying." A week later, Mara showed up again, this time holding 2 bus tickets and her guitar. "Auditions are this weekend," she said with a grin that dared Emily to refuse. "And guess what? You're not going alone." Emily sighed but smiled faintly for the first time in months. "You're crazy. Crazy enough to believe you can still sing," Mara said. The two spent the evening on the couch. Mara strummed her guitar softly, coaxing Emily to hum along. The sound was fragile, shaky, almost invisible, but it was there. When Emily stopped, embarrassed, Mara grinned. "See? She's still in there." Emily didn't admit it, but that single moment made something inside her stir. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt the faint rhythm of life returning. Not joy, not yet, but possibility. The morning of the audition came gray and cold. Emily woke before sunrise, her stomach twisting in knots. The old locket lay on her nightstand, catching the weak glow of dawn. She reached for it and slipped it around her neck, the metal cool against her skin. The weight felt both comforting and terrifying, like carrying her mother's memory into a place it didn't belong. Mara arrived a few minutes later, knocking loudly to break the silence. "You ready?" she asked, holding 2 cups of coffee and a smile that tried too hard to hide her nerves. Emily nodded, though her hands trembled as she zipped her coat. They didn't talk much on the way to the bus stop. The streets were still slick from rain, and the world felt heavy, muffled by fog. On the ride to the city, Emily sat by the window, watching raindrops chase each other down the glass. The closer they got to the studio, the faster her heart beat. Her reflection in the window looked pale, tired, but alive. Mara nudged her gently. "Hey," she said. "Just remember why you're doing this." Emily turned to her. "I'm not sure I remember anymore." Mara smiled softly. "Then let the music remind you." When they arrived, the line of contestants wrapped around the block. Some practiced vocal runs, others chatted nervously, and a few seemed too confident for comfort. Emily clutched her registration form like a lifeline. Everywhere she looked, she saw bright clothes, sparkling makeup, and faces full of ambition. She felt out of place in her simple jeans and gray sweater. Inside, the air buzzed with tension. A few contestants recognized her from local open mics years ago and offered polite smiles. She tried to return them, but couldn't hold their gaze. Every sound, every laugh felt louder than it should. She took a deep breath and repeated Mara's words in her head. "Let the music remind you." When her number was called for pre-screening, her knees nearly gave out. She followed the staff member down a long hallway lined with posters of past winners. Each one looked confident and radiant, frozen mid-performance. Emily felt smaller with every step. She kept one hand on her locket, as if holding on to her mother's strength. The small audition room smelled faintly of coffee and stage makeup. A producer behind a laptop gave her a quick nod. "You can start whenever you're ready," he said, barely looking up. Emily stared at the microphone. It stood cold and still, like the one she used to sing into at home with her mom. She took a deep breath and started softly, her voice unsteady but real. The first few lines came out cracked, but then something shifted. The melody pulled her forward, carrying her through the fear. For a brief moment, she felt free. When she finished, the producer looked up, surprised. "That was different," he said. "You've got something. Not polished, but something." He scribbled her name onto a short list. "Welcome to the next round." Emily blinked, barely processing the words. As she stepped outside, Mara hugged her tight. "See?" she said, eyes shining. "You just needed one." "Yes." Emily smiled faintly, tears forming in her eyes. That night, she packed a small suitcase for Los Angeles. Every movement felt fragile but full of meaning. As she closed it, the locket glimmered under the light, her mother's silent blessing. The night before Emily left for Los Angeles, the rain fell harder than usual, tapping against her window like restless fingers. Her small apartment felt emptier than ever. The packed suitcase sat beside her bed, zipped and ready. But she couldn't sleep. Every part of her wanted to believe this trip meant a new beginning. Yet fear whispered that she wasn't ready. She sat on the edge of her bed, holding her locket, running her thumb over the words, "Always believe." For a long time, she just listened to the rain and tried to imagine what her mother would say if she were there. At dawn, she walked to the bus terminal, her breath visible in the cold morning air. The city was just waking up, streetlights fading, a few early commuters hurrying by. Her ticket was folded neatly in her pocket. The terminal smelled faintly of coffee and diesel. Announcements echoed over the speakers, calling passengers to their gates. When the bus to Los Angeles was announced, her stomach clenched. She almost turned around, almost walked back home, but then she saw a mother and daughter hugging at the platform. The little girl was singing quietly to calm her nerves, and the tune was so familiar that Emily froze. It was "Morning Comes," the song she had written years ago with her mother, the one she hadn't sung since the funeral. The melody wrapped around her, like a memory she couldn't escape. Without thinking, she smiled faintly. The little girl noticed and smiled back before running into her mother's arms. It was a small moment, but it felt like a sign. Emily boarded the bus and found a seat by the window. The worn fabric smelled faintly of dust and old perfume. As the bus pulled away from the station, she leaned her head against the glass, watching the city shrink behind her. The morning light painted the passing fields in gold and green. She put in her earphones and pressed play on her phone. The soft guitar intro of "Morning Comes" filled her ears, and before she knew it, tears began to fall. Each lyric brought back a memory: the nights she and her mom stayed up writing together, the laughter when they forgot lines, the quiet understanding when words didn't come. The song wasn't just about mourning. It was about surviving the night. Hours passed. The scenery changed from gray suburbs to wide, open fields. At one point, the bus stopped at a rest area where travelers stretched and bought coffee. Emily stayed seated, staring at her reflection in the window. She barely recognized herself. The girl who used to sing for fun had vanished, replaced by someone searching for a reason to keep going. As the bus rolled on, she began to hum softly along with the music, her voice fragile but steady. Across the aisle, the same little girl from the terminal turned her head and smiled again. She began humming with her. Their two quiet voices filled the bus like sunlight breaking through clouds. For a brief moment, Emily didn't feel alone. The song ended, and silence returned. She wiped her eyes and whispered to herself, "I can do this." The bus rolled south through the endless California highways. The closer they got to Los Angeles, the more alive the world seemed, billboards flashing, the skyline stretching wide. But with every mile, her anxiety grew heavier. She thought about the people she'd meet, the competition, the cameras. She wasn't sure she could handle it. Still, she clutched the locket and whispered her mother's words again. Always believe. By the time the bus reached the city, the sun had started to set. The golden light poured through the windows, bathing everything in warmth. Emily closed her eyes and took a deep breath, knowing that once the doors opened, her life might never be the same. When the bus finally stopped at the Los Angeles terminal, the air outside felt different, warmer, heavier, and charged with energy. Emily stepped onto the pavement, her small suitcase rolling behind her. She looked around, overwhelmed by the noise and color. Street vendors called out near the curb, travelers rushed past, and the traffic roared like a constant storm. For someone who had spent months trapped in silence, the city felt deafening. She found a small cafe across the street and ordered a cup of tea, hands trembling as she fumbled for change. A group of young people sat nearby, laughing over audition forms. Their voices carried easily through the room. "They say Keanu Reeves is going to be one of the guest judges," one of them said excitedly. Another replied, "Come on, that's just a rumor. He's an actor, not a music judge." Emily's heart skipped. Keanu Reeves, the name alone, brought an odd comfort. She had always admired him, not just for his movies, but for the calm dignity he carried in every interview. If he really was going to be there, somehow that made everything feel less intimidating. Still, a small voice in her head whispered that she didn't belong here. She stared down into her tea until it went cold. After a while, she checked her phone for directions to the next big star studio. The map showed a long route across town with one bus transfer. She took a deep breath, tightened her grip on the suitcase handle, and began walking toward the stop. Every few steps, she questioned her decision to come, but the thought of her mother kept her moving. The studio was impossible to miss. A tall glass building stood ahead, wrapped in banners and flashing lights. Crowds of contestants milled around outside, some singing loudly to warm up, others clutching lyric sheets like survival gear. The energy was electric. Hope, fear, and ambition, all tangled together. Emily found herself near the back of the line, surrounded by people rehearsing. A young man with spiky hair practiced scales beside her. A woman in glittery boots belted out a pop song that made heads turn. Emily stood quietly, clutching her registration form against her chest. Her heartbeat drowned out the noise around her. Hours passed before the line began to move. When she finally reached the registration table, the staff handed her a contestant badge and told her to wait in the holding area. The room inside was crowded, full of nervous laughter and excitement. Large screens played highlight reels from previous seasons, showing winners crying and hugging judges. Emily found an empty chair near the corner and sat down, her fingers tracing the number pinned to her shirt, 329. She tried to steady her breathing. Every few minutes, another contestant's name was called, followed by a burst of applause or the faint sound of disappointment as someone walked back out. Her phone buzzed with a message from Mara. "You got this. Don't forget who you are." She smiled weakly at the screen, whispering, "I'll try." The room grew quieter as whispers spread that something unusual was happening backstage. A few minutes later, the doors opened and a small group of staff members entered, carrying new equipment. Behind them walked a tall man in a dark jacket, his hair slightly tousled, eyes calm and kind. The chatter stopped instantly. Emily's breath caught when she realized who it was. Keanu Reeves had just walked into the studio. The atmosphere shifted the moment Keanu entered. Even the most confident contestants fell silent. He moved with quiet ease, greeting staff members, shaking hands, and thanking the crew as if he'd been there all along. There was no entourage, no spotlight, just calm presence. Emily watched from her corner seat, frozen between awe and disbelief. He looked exactly as she'd imagined from interviews, humble, grounded, almost ordinary in the way he treated everyone with kindness. When a nervous contestant accidentally dropped a guitar case near him, Keanu bent down first to help, offering a reassuring smile. He turned slightly, scanning the room, and for a brief moment, his gaze met Emily's. It wasn't a long stare, just a flicker of recognition, a simple kindness that felt like a spark in a dark room. She looked away quickly, her heart pounding, but she could still feel that calmness lingering, as if his quiet strength had reached her somehow. No one knew why he was there yet. Rumors whispered that he would appear as a guest mentor or judge. Emily didn't care. All she knew was that for the first time since leaving home, she didn't feel alone. Something in her life had just begun to change. The waiting hall was a storm of voices and nerves. Dozens of contestants filled every chair, some pacing the floor, others rehearsing under their breath. The buzz of tension hung heavy in the air, broken only by sudden bursts of laughter or the muffled sound of music leaking from practice rooms. Emily sat near the end of a long row, her number 329 pinned unevenly to her chest. Every time a name was called, her heart jumped, followed by the anxious rhythm of footsteps disappearing through the stage doors. To her right, a confident young man tuned his guitar, his fingers moving with the ease of experience. "I've been performing since I was 10, he bragged to no one in particular. A few others nearby nodded politely, trying to focus on their own breathing. Emily tried to shut it all out. She had her earbuds in, but no music playing, pretending to listen just to drown out the noise. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling. When the studio doors opened again, a girl came running out, tears streaming down her face. Her friend followed, whispering comfort. The room went silent for a moment before returning to its restless chatter. The reality of what awaited them beyond those doors pressed down on everyone like invisible weight. Emily clutched the locket around her neck. It had become her anchor, the only thing that kept her from bolting for the exit. She whispered softly, "You can do this," though her voice shook. Across the hall, Keanu appeared with a small group of producers. He wasn't speaking loudly, just asking simple questions, greeting contestants as he passed. His calm energy seemed to quiet the air around him. Emily looked up once and caught sight of him again. He was talking to one of the crew members, listening intently, nodding as though every word mattered. She couldn't hear what he said, but his presence alone steadied her for a moment. Then came her first real test. The cocky contestant beside her, the same one tuning his guitar earlier, leaned closer and sneered. "You're shaking like a leaf. You sure you're in the right room? They don't give prizes for crying." Emily froze. Her lips parted, but no words came. She lowered her eyes, gripping the locket tighter, willing herself not to react. The boy laughed softly, turning back to his guitar. "Didn't think so," he muttered. Mara's words echoed in her mind. "Let the music remind you." But right now, even remembering the melody felt impossible. Her thoughts were scattered, heart pounding so fast, it hurt. A production assistant entered, clipboard in hand. "Number 329, she called. The sound sliced through Emily's fog of panic. It was her turn. She stood on shaking legs, her throat dry. As she walked toward the door, the same rude contestant called after her, "Good luck, sweetheart. Don't faint before the first note." His laughter followed her down the hall. The stage entrance felt like stepping into another world. The bright studio lights hit her face instantly, so sharp they almost blinded her. Rows of audience members stretched beyond the cameras. The judges' table gleamed under the lights. Lana Grace, music producer Julian Cross, and Keanu Reeves sitting calmly between them. Ryan Hale, the host, smiled professionally as she approached the microphone. "Welcome, contestant number 329, he announced. "Tell us your name." Emily's mouth went dry. Emily Dawson." "Welcome, Emily. Whenever you're ready," Ryan said with an encouraging nod. The audience clapped politely, more out of habit than excitement. Somewhere backstage, the band waited for her cue. The pianist, looked up expectantly. Emily took a deep breath and nodded to begin. The first soft chord filled the studio, but her voice never came. The first note from the piano hung in the air, waiting for her voice to follow, but nothing came. Emily's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Her pulse raced so fast she could hear it pounding in her ears. She could see the audience beyond the lights, a blur of faces, some curious, others impatient. The silence stretched too long. The pianist glanced at her nervously, unsure whether to continue. The sound of a cough from somewhere in the crowd echoed in the quiet. Emily swallowed hard, her throat closing tighter with every heartbeat. The words of her song, words she'd practiced 100 times, vanished from her mind. Ryan Hale, the host, took a step closer, his smile thinning. "Miss Dawson," he said carefully, "do you need a moment?" Emily blinked at him, unable to respond. Every muscle in her body was locked. She could feel her hands shaking against the microphone. She tried to take a breath, but it caught halfway. Panic spread through her chest like fire. Someone in the front row whispered, "She's freezing up." Another laughed quietly. The sound hit her like a slap. Her vision blurred. The heat from the stage lights pressed against her skin until she felt faint. Ryan looked toward the judges' table for guidance. Lana Grace gave a sympathetic nod, but mouthed the words, "Wrap it up." Julian Cross was already scribbling something on his notes, not even looking up. Ryan turned back to Emily, microphone in hand. "It's all right," he said, forcing a smile. "You can try again if you want, or we can come back to you later." Emily wanted to say yes, to try again, but her voice wouldn't cooperate. She shook her head slightly, tears forming in her eyes. Her body refused to move. The cameras zoomed in on her trembling face. The control room producer muttered something about cutting to commercial, but Ryan decided to handle it live. He stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder to guide her gently off stage. And then Keanu moved. From his seat at the judges' table, he leaned forward slightly, studying her face. His calm expression didn't change, but his eyes softened. There was something in her that reminded him of an old wound, something unspoken. He tilted his head, watching her struggle between walking away and trying again. The entire studio had gone silent, sensing something was about to happen. Ryan's hand hovered near Emily's shoulder, uncertain now. Keanu stood up slowly. The audience gasped. Even the camera crew hesitated, unsure whether to follow him or cut the feed. His chair scraped softly against the floor as he made his way to the stage. Emily didn't see him at first. She was staring at the microphone stand, tears falling freely now. But when the sound of his footsteps reached her, she froze again. This time, for a different reason. He walked calmly, his pace unhurried, his expression thoughtful. He wasn't there as a celebrity. He looked more like a friend crossing a room to comfort someone in pain. Ryan stepped back immediately, clearing the way. Keanu stopped a few feet from Emily. The lights glinted against his black blazer, but his tone when he spoke was soft and low, meant only for her. "Hey," he said, his voice gentle. "Take a breath." The crowd watched in stunned silence. Emily blinked, hardly believing who was standing before her. Keanu smiled faintly, reassuringly. "No one here needs perfection," he said quietly. "They just want to hear your heart." Her lips trembled. The tears that had been falling from fear now came from something else, recognition, relief. The studio didn't move. Even the air seemed to pause. Emily's knees nearly gave out. The room had fallen completely silent, as if the entire audience was holding its breath with her. Keanu's words sank deep, disarming the storm inside her. For a moment, the noise, the lights, the pressure, all disappeared. She looked at him through tears, barely able to speak. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Keanu shook his head gently. "Don't be. Fear means you care. That's where the truth lives. The way he said it, calm, sincere, human, was unlike anything she'd ever heard on a stage like this. Slowly, she nodded, her trembling beginning to ease. The pianist looked toward the judges, unsure whether to continue. Keanu gave a small nod. "Play it again," he said softly. The first notes rose once more, fragile and full of space. Emily closed her eyes and clutched the locket at her chest. Her breath steadied, and then she sang. The sound was faint at first, but it carried warmth, honesty, and pain that silenced every whisper. Keanu stepped back, quietly, watching her find her voice again. By the time she reached the first chorus, the audience was motionless, listening not to a contestant, but to a broken heart, learning to speak again. The studio lights softened as the pianist hesitated over the keys, unsure whether to continue. Ryan Hale stood a few feet away, microphone still in hand, watching the moment unfold. It was something no one had seen before on Next Big Star, a celebrity judge stepping onto the stage in the middle of an audition. The producers behind the cameras exchanged quick, anxious looks. The director motioned to keep filming. Something powerful was happening, and no one wanted to stop it. Keanu approached slowly, each step deliberate, his face calm but full of empathy. When he reached Emily, she looked up through her tears, uncertain whether to move or speak. He didn't say anything at first. Instead, he lowered himself to sit beside her on the edge of the stage. The gesture was simple, but it changed the entire atmosphere. The tension broke, replaced by something quiet and human. He glanced toward her trembling hands and then to her eyes. "Everyone here has been scared before," he said, softly, his tone steady and sincere. "The trick is to sing through the fear." The microphone in her hand caught his words, and they echoed gently across the room. The audience leaned forward, holding on to every syllable. Emily shook her head slightly, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't." Keanu smiled, and it wasn't a rehearsed smile. It was kind and patient, the kind that told her he truly understood. "You already are," he said simply. She blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" He gestured gently toward her chest. "You're here. You're feeling it. That's part of the song." Emily looked down, tears falling again. But these weren't the same tears as before. They weren't from fear. They were from release. For the first time, someone wasn't asking her to be perfect. The audience, silent moments ago, began to stir. A few people in the front rows exchanged looks, unsure whether to applaud or wait. Ryan took a small step back, lowering his microphone. He didn't say a word. His usual confidence on stage faded in the presence of something genuine. The pianist still sat frozen, his hands hovering over the keys. Keanu noticed and gave him a small nod. "Play it again," he said, his voice calm but certain. The pianist hesitated for just a second before pressing the first soft chord. The melody rose like a heartbeat. Emily closed her eyes. Her body was still trembling, but now it felt different, like something was trying to push its way out through the fear. She took a deep breath, her fingers clutching the locket around her neck. The audience held its breath with her. Then, almost imperceptibly, she began to sing. The first sound was barely audible. Her voice cracked, weak and uneven. A murmur ran through the crowd, but Keanu didn't move. He kept his gaze fixed on her, calm and encouraging. Each note that came after grew stronger, as though she were finding her footing in the middle of a storm. Every word of the song carried the definite weight of her past, the grief, the loss, the silence that had haunted her since her mother's death. Yet beneath it all was something raw and beautiful, the sound of someone fighting to reclaim a part of themselves they thought was gone forever. Keanu's eyes softened. He nodded slowly, just once, as if to say, "That's it. Keep going." Emily's voice wavered, but didn't stop. Each note carried tremors of pain and courage. as if she was learning how to breathe again with every word. The lyrics weren't flawless, but they were alive. They spoke of darkness, of losing someone you loved, and of mornings that eventually came after the longest nights. Her voice filled the studio, fragile but unstoppable. Keanu stayed seated beside her, his hands resting on his knees, eyes locked on her face. His expression held no judgment, no expectation, only understanding. The crowd that had once whispered began to fall completely silent. Even the light seemed softer now, as if the whole studio recognized something sacred was unfolding. Emily faltered again halfway through the verse, her voice catching on a line about hope. She stopped singing and shook her head, whispering, "I can't do this." Keanu leaned slightly closer. "Yes, you can," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "You already did. You started." Something in his tone, the steadiness, the warmth pulled her back from the edge. She took another breath, opened her eyes, and began again. Her voice, though trembling, carried a new strength. It wasn't loud, but it was true. Behind the cameras, the crew stood frozen. The director whispered, "Don't cut. Whatever happens, keep rolling." Lana Grace, who had seen hundreds of auditions, blinked rapidly as tears formed in her eyes. Julian Cross put down his pen and leaned back, stunned. It wasn't just a performance anymore, it was confession turned into song. Emily's voice rose higher as she reached the chorus. The melody wrapped around every listener, soft but powerful, raw but filled with something undeniably human. Her tone wavered, cracked once, then recovered, steady and unafraid. Ryan Hale, still standing near the edge of the stage, lowered his microphone completely. He had seen contestants cry before, freeze before, even storm off stage, but never this. Never someone resurrecting their voice with the help of a man who didn't owe them a single thing. By the time Emily reached the final line, her eyes were closed and her face glowed under the soft white lights. The words she sang seemed to belong to everyone in the room. She ended the song with a long, trembling note that hung in the air like a prayer. Then silence. It wasn't awkward, nor was it hesitant. It was reverent. The kind of silence that follows something you can't quite describe. Keanu turned toward her, still seated. "That," he said quietly, "was brave." Emily looked at him, breathless. "It wasn't perfect." He smiled, shaking his head. "Gently. Perfection doesn't move people. Honesty does." Tears rolled freely down her face. The audience remained still for a long moment before the first clap came from Keanu. It was soft, slow, deliberate. Then, another person joined, and another. Within seconds, the entire studio erupted in applause. Emily looked out at the crowd through blurred vision, overwhelmed by the sound. For the first time in years, the noise didn't frighten her. It filled her with warmth. Keanu rose from the stool and offered her his hand. She hesitated, then took it. Together, they stood facing the audience. As the applause grew louder, a storm of gratitude and awe. Ryan finally spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, glancing toward her, "I think we just witnessed something extraordinary." As the applause thundered through the studio, Emily stood motionless, hands still in Keanu's. The lights above shimmered like stars, and for a brief, surreal moment, it felt like her mother was somewhere in that glow, listening, proud, at peace. She pressed her free hand to her locket, whispering something only she could hear. Keanu looked at her quietly, the way someone might look at a sunrise after a long night. "That's what courage sounds like," he said softly. She smiled through tears. "I didn't think I could do it." He nodded. "You didn't think you could live without her either, but here you are singing again." Those words broke her composure. She covered her mouth, sobbing quietly as the audience stood in unison, clapping until their hands hurt. The applause wasn't for perfection or showmanship. It was for something deeper, for the fragile beauty of a soul rediscovering itself in front of them. Ryan Hale stepped forward, voice low but filled with emotion. Emily Dawson, ladies and gentlemen, remember that name. The bandleader stood up, bowing slightly. Even the backstage crew peeked out, some wiping their eyes. Emily turned toward Keanu once more. "Thank you," she whispered. He smiled and gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "Don't thank me. You did this." Then, as if to seal the moment, he guided her to take a final bow. The audience roared again, camera flashes glinting across the stage like bursts of light. Emily straightened, breathing deeply. For the first time in years, the air didn't feel heavy. It felt alive. As the lights dimmed and the commercial break countdown began, Keanu stepped off the stage, glancing back at her one last time. Their eyes met no words, just mutual understanding. Something had changed for both of them that night. The pianist's fingers hovered briefly before pressing down on the keys once more. The first soft notes of Morning Comes floated through the air, gentle, uncertain, like a heartbeat restarting after too long in silence. Emily stood center stage, her face still streaked with tears, her hands trembling as she gripped the microphone. Keanu remained at the edge of the stage, his quiet presence steadying her like an unseen anchor. The melody carried her back to the small Portland balcony where she and her mother had first written the song. She remembered the way her mother's laughter mixed with the hum of traffic below, how their voices had risen together when the morning light broke through the clouds. Now, under the blinding studio lights, she felt that memory again, not as pain, but as warmth. Emily took a slow breath, her voice fragile, as she began the first line. "When the night feels too long and the stars hide away." The words trembled, but they were real. Her pitch wavered, her breath shook, yet somehow, the vulnerability made it more beautiful. The entire studio leaned closer, drawn into the raw honesty of her sound. Keanu watched from the shadows just off stage. His expression stayed composed, but his eyes glistened. Every word she sang seemed to pull something from his own past grief, loss, and the quiet courage it took to keep living through it. He wasn't hearing a performance. He was hearing a confession. As the chorus approached, Emily's trembling began to ease. Her fingers loosened around the microphone, and her voice found its rhythm. "Morning comes, and I am still here," she sang, her tone soft but sure. The pianist matched her energy, slowing slightly, giving her room to breathe. A mother in the front row reached for her child's hand, tears slipping down her cheeks. The camera zoomed in on faces around the room, contestants, producers, even the lighting crew, all silent, transfixed. When Emily reached the bridge, her voice cracked again. But this time, she didn't stop. She pushed through it, eyes closing as the lyrics poured out. "I lost the light, but I learned to wait. The morning always finds its way." The words hung heavy in the air, every syllable vibrating with truth. Keanu's jaw tightened. He blinked, looking down briefly, then back up, as though steadying himself. It was rare to see emotion in him, but tonight, he didn't hide it. His eyes reflected the stage lights, glistening with quiet empathy. By the time she reached the final verse, Emily's posture had changed. The girl who had trembled moments ago now stood grounded, her voice no longer whispering but blooming. The music swelled behind her, and every note carried a heartbeat of its own. Her last words floated out softly. "And when morning comes, I'll sing again." The final note lingered in the air, then silence. A deep, aching silence that no one wanted to break. The silence after Emily's final note was so complete that even the hum of the studio lights seemed to fade. For several long seconds, no one dared to move. It was as if the air itself had been suspended, afraid that breathing might shatter what had just been born in that room. Emily stood motionless in the center of the stage, her chest rising and falling with each shaky breath. Her fingers still clutched the microphone, knuckles pale. But her eyes were different. They no longer looked lost. They looked open, alive, and steady. The tears that had filled them moments earlier had turned into something else: recognition, peace, maybe even pride. A faint rustle came from the audience as a woman in the second row reached into her purse for a tissue. She dabbed her eyes, whispering something to the person next to her. Others followed, wiping tears silently. A young man in the back lowered his phone, realizing he'd stopped recording halfway through because he'd been too moved to watch through a screen. Keanu still stood at the edge of the stage, unmoving. His hands were clasped in front of him, and his eyes shimmered. There was a look in them that few people had ever seen. A quiet, raw empathy that came from his own long history with grief. He had lost before, and he recognized that sound. The voice of someone stepping back into the world after being gone for too long. Ryan Hale exhaled quietly, almost forgetting he was still holding a live microphone. He opened his mouth to speak, then stopped, realizing words would cheapen what had just happened. Instead, he simply took a few steps back, giving the moment to Emily. The cameras slowly zoomed in on her face. Her expression said everything: relief, disbelief, gratitude, and the quiet shock of survival. And then, finally, Keanu moved. He stepped forward, his slow clap echoing in the stillness. 1, 2, 3 steady claps. Not loud, not commanding, but deliberate. The audience hesitated for a fraction of a second before joining in. The sound swelled soft at first, then building into thunderous applause. People rose from their seats. Some cheered, others cried, and a few simply stood with their hands over their hearts. Emily blinked against the lights, the noise, the flood of emotion rushing toward her. She brought a trembling hand to her chest, where her locket rested against her heart. Keanu climbed the last few steps onto the stage and stopped beside her. He didn't reach for the microphone. He didn't make a grand speech. He simply looked at her and said, "Thank you for being brave." The sound of his voice broke through the roar of the audience, like calm water cutting through fire. Emily tried to reply, but no words came. She only nodded, her tears falling freely now, not from fear, but from something deeper, healing. Keanu gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if to say, "You did it." That single line, "Thank you for being brave," would soon be replayed millions of times across the internet. But in that moment, it wasn't about fame or cameras. It was about two souls who had both been broken once, meeting in the middle of a song and helping each other remember what it felt like to be whole again. As the applause continued, Emily turned slightly toward Keanu, unsure what to do next. He gestured gently for her to take a bow, and when she hesitated, he bowed with her. The audience erupted even louder. For a brief moment, the studio lights seemed softer, warmer, as if the universe itself had leaned closer to witness the miracle that had just unfolded. The camera panned across the faces of the crowd, people crying, clapping, smiling through tears. Even the judges' table looked different now. Lana Grace had her hand over her mouth, visibly moved. Julian Cross, usually stoic, was blinking fast to keep his composure. The sound technician near the booth whispered, "That was real. That was life happening." Emily looked out into the audience and saw something she hadn't seen in years. Hope reflected back at her. People weren't just applauding a performance. They were applauding her courage to try again. For the first time, she believed she had given something that mattered. Keanu turned to leave the stage, but Emily stopped him with a quiet voice. "You said everyone has been scared before," she said softly. "So," only he could hear. "Were you?" He met her eyes, a faint smile touching his lips. "Every day," he replied. "But I learned that fear isn't the end of the song. It's the first note." Her tears returned, but this time they felt cleansing. Light. She nodded, unable to speak, and whispered, "Thank you." Keanu gave a small bow of his head and stepped away, disappearing back toward the judge's table. The cameras caught his faint smile as he sat down, eyes still glistening. Emily stayed where she was, soaking in the sound of applause, the warmth of the lights, the pulse of her own heart. Somewhere deep inside, she felt her mother's voice again, soft and proud. "You sing like the rain, gentle, but it touches everything." The host finally stepped forward, still visibly emotional. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ryan said, voice trembling slightly, "I think we've all been reminded of what this show is really about." The crowd stood again, clapping as the screen slowly faded to black. By the time the studio lights dimmed and Emily stepped outside, the world had already begun to change. The moment she and Keanu shared the trembling voice, the whispered encouragement, the song that healed the silence was caught by every camera in the building. Within hours, it was clipped, edited, and shared across social media. The headlines spread like wildfire. Keanu Reeves comforts. Shaking singer. What happens next? Brings everyone to tears. At first, Emily didn't know. She was too exhausted to check her phone, too overwhelmed to process what had just happened. Mara called that night, crying on the other end of the line, but Emily could barely speak. She just listened to her friend say, "The whole world saw you, Em. You did it." She fell asleep on the hotel bed, still in her performance clothes, her locket pressed against her chest. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, and her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Notifications poured in hundreds, then thousands. Her face was everywhere, on news feeds, in headlines, on video thumbnails. Clips of the performance flooded every platform. People from around the world were sharing the moment Keanu had walked onto the stage. The video hit 1 million views before noon, 10 million by evening. Hashtags like #the girl who found her voice and #sing anyway started trending. Comment sections filled with hearts and tears. Some wrote, "This reminded me to face my fears again." Others said, "Keanu doesn't just play heroes, he is one." But most messages were for her. People called her an inspiration, a symbol of courage, a reminder that vulnerability was not weakness. Meanwhile, talk shows replayed the clip, analyzing every frame. News anchors spoke about the rawness of the moment, how a superstar's kindness reignited someone's lost voice. Even morning programs on the other side of the world discussed it, calling it one of the most moving live television moments in years. Emily sat at the edge of her bed, her phone glowing in her hands. She scrolled through endless messages, some from strangers, some from old friends, even a few from people she hadn't spoken to since before her mother's death. She felt both amazed and terrified. The world was suddenly looking at her, expecting her to be someone she still wasn't sure she knew. Then her phone buzzed again, with a message from an unfamiliar number labeled "Production Office." Her heart skipped when she opened it. The message was short, simple, and signed with one initial. "No pressure. Just keep singing. K." Her lips parted, a soft laugh breaking through the tears she didn't realize she was holding back. For the first time since the performance, she smiled. Emily stared at the message for a long time, the simple words replaying in her mind. No pressure. Just keep singing. It didn't sound like something written by a celebrity to a stranger. It sounded like something her mother might have said. The tone was warm, grounding, and completely free of expectation. She read it again, smiled through tears, and whispered, "Okay." Later that morning, she ventured outside for the first time since the show. The Los Angeles air was cool and bright, but she felt strangely disconnected from the noise around her. Billboards and passing buses flashed advertisements for the next big star episode, and though her face wasn't there yet, her name already lived in millions of hearts online. She ducked into a small cafe on Melrose Avenue, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap. She just wanted a quiet corner and a moment to breathe. But even here, she overheard people talking about the clip. Two women near the counter were watching it on a phone, tears in their eyes. One of them said, "I don't even watch singing shows, but this was real." Emily turned away quickly, her throat tightening. It didn't feel real to her yet either. She ordered tea and sat by the window, watching the world go by, unsure what to do next. Her phone kept buzzing messages from journalists, show producers, music agents, but she didn't answer any of them. She needed silence. That evening, she met with her therapist, Dr. Alvarez, over video call. Emily expected to talk about the nerves and the overwhelming attention, but when the session began, Dr. Alvarez smiled and clicked a button to share her screen. "Before we talk," she said, "I want to show you something." The video began playing the moment when Emily froze. Then, the part where Keanu walked onto the stage. Emily bit her lip, her eyes welling up as she heard his words again. "Everyone here has been scared before. The trick is to sing through the fear." By the time the song reached the final verse, she was openly crying. When it ended, Dr. Alvarez paused the clip and said softly, "That's courage, Emily, not performance courage." Emily pressed her palm against her chest, breathing unevenly. "I didn't even feel brave," she whispered. "I was terrified." "That's the thing about courage," Dr. Alvarez replied. "It only exists in people who are scared." They talked for a long while after that, about grief, about music, about how healing sometimes begins the moment we stop running from what hurts most. When the call ended, Emily felt lighter. The noise of the world didn't seem so loud anymore. She curled up on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, and played the clip one more time. As she watched herself on the screen, she didn't see fear anymore. She saw a version of herself that had survived. A girl who had sung, cried, and stood back up under the brightest lights imaginable. For the first time in years, she looked at her reflection in the dark phone screen and whispered, "I'm still here." That night, Emily couldn't sleep. The world outside her hotel window shimmered with city lights, but her thoughts were louder than traffic. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the crowd standing, Keanu's steady gaze, and the soft nod he gave when she finished singing. It played on a loop, not as a haunting memory, but as a quiet promise that she had finally begun to live again. She scrolled through her messages one last time. Among the thousands, one stood out from a woman she didn't know. It read, "My daughter has severe anxiety. She watched your video and said, if she can do it, maybe I can too. Thank you for showing her she's not broken." Emily stared at the message until her eyes blurred. She set the phone down, covered her face with her hands, and cried not from sadness, but from something she hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. The next morning, she walked through the hotel lobby where televisions played entertainment news. Every screen showed her performance. Hosts spoke about the unexpected moment when Keanu Reeves turned a singing show into a masterclass on empathy. She stopped for a second, watching herself on screen, realizing how unreal it still felt. As she left the hotel, a young girl approached her nervously, holding a notepad. "Excuse me," the girl said. "Are you the lady from Next Big Star?" Emily hesitated, then nodded. The girl's eyes filled with tears. "Your song helped me after my mom passed away," she said quietly. "I just wanted to say thank you." Emily knelt, meeting her at eye level. "Then we're both singing for someone we love," she said softly. The girl smiled and hugged her. It was the simplest, most human moment Emily had experienced since the performance, and it meant more than any fame ever could. That afternoon, the producers called again to invite her to appear on a national morning show. She almost declined, but then remembered Keanu's words, "Just keep singing." She agreed, but only under one condition: that they talk about mental health and the healing power of music, not fame. The producers hesitated, but eventually agreed. That night, as she prepared to sleep, Emily placed her mother's locket on the bedside table. The city lights flickered outside like tiny stars. She whispered, "I sang through the fear, Mom." Her phone vibrated once more. It was another message from the production office. "He watched your clip again tonight. He said you reminded him what honesty sounds like." Emily smiled softly and whispered into the quiet, "Then maybe that's what I'll keep giving the world: honesty." Fame came faster than Emily could comprehend. Within a week, her name was everywhere. Articles, interviews, and endless reaction videos. News anchors called her performance a viral miracle, and countless people replayed the moment she found her voice. For a while, it felt like a dream she didn't want to wake from. But dreams never last long when the whole world is watching. The first wave of criticism came quietly, hidden beneath thousands of loving comments. A few strangers mocked the way she cried on stage, calling it an act. Some wrote that Keanu's involvement was a publicity stunt. Others questioned her talent altogether. At first, Emily ignored it. She told herself that negativity was inevitable when something became popular. But late one night, when she couldn't sleep, she made the mistake of reading the comments. They weren't just harsh, they were cruel. People twisted her story, claiming she exaggerated her trauma for sympathy. Someone even edited a video mocking her voice crack during the song, adding laughter tracks to it. It spread quickly. Her chest tightened as she scrolled. Every kind message she had received before felt drowned out by this wave of poison. She slammed her phone down and pressed her hands to her face, shaking. The same fear that had silenced her on stage now came rushing back. The voices of strangers, faceless and loud, echoed in her head, replacing the applause she once heard in her dreams. For the next few days, Emily avoided social media completely. She stopped answering calls from producers and reporters. Even Mara's messages went unread. Every sound notification made her stomach twist. She began walking at night just to escape the noise inside her mind. One evening, after a particularly cruel article suggested that Keanu had rescued her as a way to improve his public image, Emily drove to the beach. It was late, and the sky was clear, the stars reflecting across the dark water. She sat in the sand, pulling her knees close, the sound of waves filling the emptiness she felt inside. She whispered, "I just wanted to sing." The words caught in the wind and disappeared. For a long while, she stayed like that, silent, trembling, alone under the open sky. The sea breeze cooled her tears, but nothing eased the ache in her chest. She thought about deleting everything, disappearing before the world tore apart the fragile hope she had rebuilt. And then, from behind her, a voice spoke softly, "You shouldn't let strangers rewrite your story." She froze, turning her head. Under the faint glow of a nearby streetlight, she saw him. Keanu stood a few feet away, holding 2 cups of coffee. His face was calm, his expression warm and steady. For a second, Emily thought she was imagining him. "What are you doing here?" she asked quietly. He smiled, faintly, filming nearby. "A crew member mentioned you were struggling. Thought I'd check in." He walked closer, extending one of the cups toward her. "Still like your coffee black?" Emily managed a small, tearful laugh. "I didn't know you remembered." "I remember everything that matters," he said, sitting down beside her on the sand. For a while, they sat without speaking. The waves rolled in softly, breaking against the shore with rhythmic calm. The sound filled the spaces where words weren't needed. Emily sipped from the cup he'd handed her, the warmth grounding her in the cold night air. Her eyes stayed on the horizon, where the dark water met the faint glow of city lights. "I thought I was ready for this," she said quietly, "but I'm not. I thought I could handle people seeing me, but now I feel smaller than ever." Keanu nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the tide. It's strange, isn't it? How kindness can bring as much noise as fame. She looked at him, puzzled. He smiled, faintly. When you do something honest, it touches people, but it also scares them. Honesty reminds them of what they're hiding from. Emily sighed, her breath visible in the cool air. They're saying I faked it, that you only helped me to look good. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. If I cared about looking good, I'd have stayed in my seat. His tone was light, but the warmth behind it was real. You sang from a place most people never reach. That's what frightened them. They can't handle seeing something real on a stage built for performance. She blinked hard, tears rising again. It's hard not to read it all. I tell myself to ignore them, but her voice trailed off. He glanced at her, his tone gentle but steady. You're human. Of course it hurts. But those people don't know your story. They don't know what it cost you to sing that night. She stared at her hands. It cost everything. He nodded. And that's exactly why it mattered. They sat quietly again, watching the foam creep toward their shoes. The wind carried the smell of salt and seaweed. A couple walked by in the distance, laughing softly, unaware of who sat in the shadows near the rocks. After a while, Keanu spoke again, more softly now. You know, after River died, I didn't want to act anymore. I couldn't face cameras or crowds. Everything felt pointless. But someone once told me that when you share your pain, it stops owning you. You start owning it. Emily turned to him, eyes wide. Did it help? He smiled faintly. Eventually, I stopped performing for perfection and started performing for presence. Presence, she repeated. It means showing up, even when you're scared, especially when you're scared. She nodded slowly, staring back at the sea. Maybe that's what singing is for me now. Not about being perfect, just about being here. Keanu's smile grew. Exactly. The waves crashed softly again, washing over their silence. For the first time in days, Emily felt her breathing slow, the heaviness in her chest easing. She looked at him, the moonlight catching the calm in his eyes, and whispered, "Thank you." He raised his coffee cup slightly. For what? For reminding me that I'm still allowed to show up. The waves shimmered under the faint moonlight, curling toward the sand and retreating again like deep breaths of the sea. Emily sat beside Keanu, the coffee cup warming her cold hands. For the first time all night, she wasn't crying. She was just quiet, listening. There was something about his calm presence that made the silence feel safe. He leaned back slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, eyes on the horizon. You know, he began softly, people think calm means peace, but most of the time, calm comes after chaos. Emily looked at him, uncertain what he meant. He turned toward her, his expression thoughtful. When I was younger, I lost someone very close to me. My best friend, River. We were like brothers. We started our careers together, shared dreams, shared laughter. And then, one day, he was gone. Just like that. The sound of the waves filled the space between his words. I didn't know how to move on, he continued. The noise of the world felt too loud. Reporters, cameras, questions, none of it made sense. So I did the only thing I could. I went quiet. For years. Emily's heart tightened. She had seen that same quietness in his interviews, the way he chose his words carefully, the stillness in his eyes that seemed to carry both grace and sorrow. Now she understood why. I stopped showing up to things, he said. I'd get on my motorcycle and ride for hours. I didn't want to be seen. I just wanted to remember what it felt like to breathe without pretending. He smiled faintly, not out of happiness, but memory. The world moves too fast. Sometimes it doesn't give us permission to grieve. It just wants us to perform, to smile, to keep going. And when you can't, they call you broken. Emily nodded slowly, tears stinging her eyes again. That's exactly how it feels, she whispered. Like the world moved on, and I didn't. He looked at her gently. That's because healing isn't about, quote, catching up. It's about learning to live where you are. For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of the sea washed over them both, steady and endless. Then Keanu looked down at the sand, drawing a small circle with his finger. I know what it's like to freeze when the world is too loud, he said. You think silence will protect you, but eventually, silence becomes its own cage. Emily swallowed hard. How did you get out of it? He gave a faint smile. Someone reminded me that pain doesn't disappear. It transforms when we share it. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Transforms? She asked quietly. How? Keanu looked out toward the horizon, where the moonlight shimmered across the water like broken glass turning to silver. By turning it into something useful, he said. When River died, I thought the pain would destroy me. But after a while, I realized it wasn't supposed to vanish. It was supposed to teach me. Every time I helped someone, every time I reached out to someone lost, I felt like I was giving that pain a purpose. It stopped being something that hurt me and started being something that connected me to others. Emily listened intently. The sound of the waves and his steady voice blended into something almost rhythmic, comforting. I don't think I've ever heard anyone describe it that way, she said. He smiled softly. That's because most people run from pain. It reminds us that we're still human. Emily nodded slowly. When my mom died, I stopped singing because every note reminded me of her. It hurt too much. That's natural, he said gently. You were afraid the sound would make you remember. She looked down, voice trembling. But singing again brought her back in a different way. It felt like she was still here. Keanu's eyes softened. Exactly. That's the transformation. The pain didn't vanish. You just started carrying it differently. They sat in silence for a while. The waves rolled in, steady and calm, as if listening too. Finally, Emily said, when you went quiet all those years, did anyone pull you back the way you did for me? Keanu's gaze drifted upward toward the stars. Not exactly, he said. No one told me to speak, but I met people who showed me it was okay to be alive again. Small kindnesses, a stranger holding a door, a fan who said one of my old movies helped them through a dark time. Those moments reminded me that connection doesn't have to be loud to be real. Emily smiled faintly. That's kind of what you did for me. He gave a small laugh. Maybe. Or maybe you did it for yourself. And I just reminded you that you could. She looked at him, her eyes shining. Either way, thank you. Keanu reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small black notebook. Its cover was worn, edges frayed. He turned it in his hand for a moment before, offering it to her. Here, he said. She hesitated. What is it? Something that helped me when I didn't have words. I used to write thoughts, memories, lyrics, anything I couldn't say out loud. It wasn't about being poetic. It was about surviving. Emily took the notebook carefully, as though it were fragile. The leather felt warm from his hand. I want you to fill it, he said. Write your next song here. Not for an audience, not for a show for yourself. And when you finish it, I want to hear it. Her throat tightened. You mean that? He nodded. I'll be waiting. The weight of the notebook in her hands felt heavier than paper. It felt like a promise. They sat for a while longer, neither needing to speak. The ocean whispered around them, the night calm and vast. Emily traced the edge of the notebook, imagining the blank pages waiting to hold her story. As the first hint of dawn colored the horizon, Keanu stood and brushed the sand from his jeans. Morning's coming, he said. with a small smile. Emily looked up, realizing she hadn't noticed how late or how early it had become. She smiled back. It always does. He gave her one last nod, quiet and knowing. Keep singing, Emily. That's how the world will know you healed. 3 months later, the lights of Next Big Star glowed again. But the air felt different this time. The show was hosting its annual charity episode, a special event celebrating stories of resilience. Contestants from previous seasons were invited back to perform, and among the long list of names on the program was one that caught everyone off guard: Emily Dawson. When the producers saw her name, they exchanged surprised glances. The young woman whose trembling voice had broken the internet was coming back. No one knew what to expect. Some wondered if she'd sing the same song that had made her famous. Others doubted she'd show up at all. But when she walked into the studio that morning, there was no doubt Emily was back. She didn't look like the same girl who had frozen under the lights months before. Her posture was upright, her steps calm and certain. The tremor in her hands was gone. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair loose over her shoulders, her mother's locket resting just below her collarbone. The crew members greeted her warmly, some even clapping softly as she passed. Emily smiled modestly and thanked them, her voice steady but kind. In the dressing room, she placed her small leather notebook, the one Keanu had given her, on the table beside the mirror. Its pages were full now, scribbled with lyrics, sketches, and fragments of thought. She ran her fingers over it, remembering his words. "Write your next song here. I'll be waiting to hear it." A stagehand knocked on the door. 10 minutes, Miss Dawson." "Thank you," she said, standing up. As she walked toward the stage entrance, she caught a glimpse of the judges' panel on the monitors. There he was again, Keanu, seated in the center, wearing a dark blazer and the same calm expression that had once steadied her heart. Their eyes met briefly through the screen, and he smiled, almost imperceptibly, as if to say, "You made it." When her name was announced, the audience reacted with a murmur of recognition, then applause. The lights dimmed, and she stepped onto the stage. The same spot where she once trembled now felt like solid ground beneath her feet. She took her place behind the microphone, breathing slowly, letting the silence stretch for a moment before she spoke. "Hi," she said softly, her voice carrying across the studio. "Some of you might remember me from before. The girl who froze." She smiled gently, the audience chuckling in response. "This time, I brought a new song. It's called Sing Anyway. It's about showing up, even when you're afraid." The pianist began to play the first few chords, gentle and warm. Emily closed her eyes and took a breath. When she started to sing, her voice came out clear, textured with emotion, but free of fear. The opening line was simple. "When my voice shakes, it still speaks truth." The words hung in the air, soft but certain. The melody was slower than her first song, built around a quiet strength that seemed to grow with every verse. "When my heart breaks, I still let it beat," she sang. "When my hands tremble, I still reach out." Her tone was richer now, deeper, shaped by everything she had lived through. The audience leaned forward, captivated by the calm power in her voice. Behind the judges' table, Keanu listened intently. His eyes closed as the music filled the room. This wasn't the same young woman he had once walked toward on a trembling stage. The timid singer who couldn't find her voice had turned her fear into art. He could hear it in every note. She wasn't performing anymore. She was speaking truth. As she moved into the chorus, her voice lifted. "Sing anyway, even when the night won't end. Sing anyway, even when the fear begins again. Sing anyway, even when the world forgets your name. Because every voice deserves to rise again." The piano swelled, and somewhere in the audience, a woman began to cry softly. Emily's eyes glistened, but she didn't waver. The lyrics had been born from sleepless nights, written on tear-stained pages in that little black notebook. Every line was a piece of her journey. Every word was her mother's memory, echoing in melody. When she reached the bridge, her tone dropped to a near whisper. When the silence comes to claim me, I'll whisper through the dark, because even broken voices can still reach a heart. The room went completely still. You could have heard a pin drop. The band stopped playing for a beat, leaving her voice alone against the vast space of the studio. Then, slowly, the music returned, gentle and reverent. Keanu opened his eyes again. He looked at Emily not as a judge, not as a celebrity, but as someone who knew what it meant to survive grief. He saw her standing there, steady under the lights, her hands still but her heart open. The final verse came, soft but triumphant. When the morning comes, I'll still be here, and if my song shakes, it means I'm real. She held the last note longer than anyone expected, her voice trembling beautifully before it faded into silence. For a full 5 seconds, no one moved. The sound of that last note still lingered, heavy with emotion. Then, slowly, one person in the front row began to stand. Another followed, and then another. Within moments, the entire studio was on its feet. Applause roared through the room. Some people shouted her name. Others just cried. Emily's eyes filled with tears again, but she smiled through them. She bowed once, gracefully, before looking toward the judge's table. Keanu was already standing. He didn't rush to speak. He simply brought his hands together and clapped, slowly, his expression full of quiet pride. His words from months ago echoed in her mind. No one here needs perfection. They just want to hear your heart. Tonight, she had finally given it. The night of the charity episode marked a turning point not just for Emily, but for countless people watching around the world. Her song, Sing Anyway, aired across every major network. And within hours, the internet erupted once again. But this time, it wasn't just admiration. It was participation. People weren't just watching her story, they were joining it. A single viewer on social media wrote, "I'm terrified of singing in public, but if Emily can do it, maybe I can too." They uploaded a short clip of themselves singing in their living room, tagging it with the hashtag number #SingAnyway. Within hours, others began doing the same. Parents, teenagers, veterans, teachers, and even people who couldn't sing at all, but wanted to show solidarity. By the next morning, the hashtag had gone viral. Thousands of videos flooded the internet, shaky cell phone recordings of people singing in cars, kitchens, hospitals, and classrooms. The message wasn't about talent, it was about courage. Each video began with the same statement, "I'm scared, but I'll sing anyway." Emily woke up to her phone buzzing nonstop. She rubbed her eyes, still half asleep, before realizing what was happening. Her name and song were everywhere again. But this time, it didn't feel overwhelming. It felt powerful. She watched video after video of people singing their way through pain, fear, or grief. Some were smiling through tears. Others sang softly, eyes closed, voices trembling. She pressed her hand over her mouth as emotion washed over her. "This isn't mine," she whispered to herself. "It's theirs now." Meanwhile, Keanu was on set for a new film in Vancouver. Between takes, his assistant handed him a phone showing one of the clips. It was a young man in a wheelchair, singing part of Emily's chorus. "Even when the fear begins again, sing anyway." The actor stared at the screen for a long time, his usual calm expression melting into something tender. He turned to his assistant and said quietly, "We need to do something with this." That same afternoon, he made several calls. Within days, discussions began about launching a foundation dedicated to supporting people who used music as therapy. Keanu insisted that it should carry the same name as Emily's song, the Sing Anyway Foundation. When the press tried to give him credit, he refused. "This wasn't my idea," he told one reporter firmly. "It was hers. I just believed in it." The announcement of the foundation made headlines, and Emily's phone lit up again. She was asked to become its ambassador, a title that frightened her at first. "I'm not a leader," she said during the first call. "I'm just someone who sang." But the representative replied, "That's exactly why people will listen." Emily hesitated before agreeing to represent the foundation. She spent a full night thinking about it, pacing the floor of her apartment. The old fear whispered again. What if I'm not strong enough? What if people stop listening? But then she opened the notebook Keanu had given her and reread her last entry. It was a single line, "Sing anyway." She smiled faintly, took a breath, and called the representative back. "I'll do it," she said. Her first public appearance as ambassador was at a small mental health conference in Seattle. The auditorium wasn't full of cameras or flashing lights, just people, teachers, social workers, therapists, and survivors. Emily walked to the microphone, heart pounding, but the fear didn't feel like an enemy this time. It felt like a reminder that she was alive. She began, quietly. "A few months ago, I couldn't say my own name on stage," she said. "Now, I stand here because someone told me that fear isn't the end of the song. It's the first note." The room was silent as she spoke about losing her mother, about freezing under the lights, about how kindness had pulled her back into the world. Her voice shook once, but she didn't stop. "I'm not brave because I sang without fear," she said. "I'm brave because I sang while still afraid." When she finished, the audience stood and applauded not for her fame, but for her truth. People lined up to talk to her afterward, sharing their own stories. A mother told her that her teenage daughter had joined a school choir for the first time in years. A man in a military jacket said her song gave him strength to face his PTSD group again. Each conversation filled Emily with something she hadn't felt in years, purpose that went beyond herself. Back in Los Angeles, the Sing Anyway Foundation began to take shape. Keanu stayed in the background, quietly funding the initiative through his production company. When asked about it in an interview, he said simply, "This is Emily's story. I just wanted to help it keep singing." The foundation opened with one goal: to make music therapy accessible to anyone struggling with anxiety, trauma, or depression. Local artists volunteered to teach classes in community centers. Soon, more programs followed: workshops, open mic nights, and songwriting sessions designed to help people heal through expression. Emily became the face of the movement, though she never sought the spotlight. She refused to perform at glamorous events and instead visited schools, shelters, and youth centers. In every talk, she repeated the same message: courage doesn't mean you stop shaking. It means you sing while shaking. Her interviews began inspiring others to act. Schools across the country started Sing Anyway clubs, small groups where students could express themselves without judgment. Some sang, others wrote poetry, and a few simply listened. Teachers wrote letters to the foundation, sharing stories of students who had rediscovered confidence through song. Emily kept every letter. She stored them in a wooden box under her bed, reading them on nights when the noise of fame felt too heavy. Each one reminded her why she started. Months later, during an interview for a major magazine, the reporter asked what success meant to her now. She smiled gently and said, "Success is when someone somewhere whispers a song to themselves and feels less alone." That line would soon become the foundation's official slogan and its heartbeat. The lights of the Los Angeles Civic Auditorium glowed like soft constellations against the dark night. A banner stretched across the entrance read, "Sing Anyway," a benefit for mental health awareness. People of all ages filled the seats: artists, students, veterans, families, each one touched in some way by the movement that had grown from a single song. Backstage, Emily adjusted the microphone pinned to her dress. She looked calm, composed, but her heartbeat raced beneath the surface. It had been a full year since she'd first stepped onto the next big star stage, trembling and voiceless. Now, she was about to sing before thousands, not as a contestant, but as a symbol of courage. A stagehand peeked through the curtain and said softly, "They're ready for you." Emily nodded, took a deep breath, and walked toward the light. The applause rose instantly, a wave of warmth that wrapped around her as she reached center stage. The band waited quietly behind her. She smiled and looked out at the sea of faces, some strangers, some familiar. And then, halfway through the crowd, she saw him. Keanu was sitting in the back row, wearing a simple black suit. He wasn't surrounded by security or attention. He blended into the audience like anyone else. Their eyes met for just a moment. He gave her a small nod, the same calm expression she had seen that night on stage a year before. She smiled mid-verse, the recognition subtle but radiant. The song she performed knew something she had written in the notebook he had given her. It was called The Light Between. It wasn't about fame or loss, but about connection, the invisible thread between people who share their pain and transform it into hope. Her voice was stronger now, but still held that gentle tremor that made it human. The lyrics spoke of storms and stillness, of mornings that follow grief, and of finding peace in imperfection. "When silence falls, I'll hum your name," she sang softly. "When darkness speaks, I'll light the flame." Keanu leaned forward slightly in his seat, listening as the music washed over the room. For him, it wasn't about performance, it was about recognition. He could hear the journey in her tone, the distance she had traveled from that trembling young woman on the stage to the confident artist before him. As she sang the final line, "We heal each other when we stay," the audience rose to their feet. The applause wasn't thunderous at first. It began softly, almost reverently, then built until it filled the hall. Emily lowered her head, smiling through tears. In the back row, Keanu stood with everyone else, clapping quietly. No cameras turned toward him, no spotlight followed. He didn't want it to. He was there simply as a listener, proud of what she had become. When the applause finally faded, Emily thanked the audience and walked off stage. Her hands shook slightly, but this time, it wasn't from fear, it was from joy. Crew members and musicians congratulated her as she made her way down the narrow backstage hallway, but she was only half listening. Her eyes scanned the crowd near the side entrance, searching for him. She found Keanu near the exit, standing quietly beside a curtain, his posture relaxed, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He clapped once as she approached, slow and sincere. "You did it again," he said softly. Emily laughed through the tears still drying on her cheeks. "I didn't think you'd come." "I told you I'd be waiting," he replied simply. "You wrote the song, didn't you?" She nodded. "In the same notebook you gave me." Every line came from there. He smiled, his eyes glinting with quiet pride. Then, "The world still needs to hear you." For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the backstage crew faded, replaced by a silence that felt almost sacred. Emily's eyes shimmered as she looked at him, realizing just how much his kindness had changed the direction of her life. "I don't think you know what that night did for me," she said softly. "I thought I'd lost my voice forever." Keanu shook his head gently. "You never lost it, Emily. You just forgot where it was." She laughed, brushing a tear away. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple," he said with that familiar calm that had comforted millions before. "Hard, but simple. You faced yourself. That's the hardest part." The sound of approaching footsteps broke the stillness. A small group of photographers had gathered at the far end of the hall, cameras in hand. Keanu glanced toward them and sighed, quietly. "Looks like they found us." Emily smiled and said, "They always do." When the photographers raised their cameras, Keanu started to step aside, but Emily reached out and stopped him. "Wait," she said gently. "It's okay. This moment belongs to both of us." He hesitated, then nodded. The flashes began soft bursts of light, capturing something more than celebrity. In one photo, Keanu's arm rested around her shoulder as they laughed. In another, they hugged tightly, both smiling through tears. It wasn't posed, it was real. The next morning, those photos were everywhere. Headlines read, "Keanu Reeves reunites with Sing Anyway, star of friendship forged in courage." But for both of them, it wasn't about publicity. It was about gratitude, two people who had faced their silence and learned to turn it into something beautiful. Later that night, after the crowd had gone home and the theater stood empty, Emily sat on the stage again. The lights were dim, only the faint glow from the aisles reflecting off the wooden floor. She opened her notebook, now filled to its final page, and wrote a single line. "When someone believes in you, it's easier to believe in yourself." As she closed it, she noticed Keanu's empty coffee cup still sitting on the edge of the stage from earlier. She smiled, picked it up, and whispered, "Thank you." Outside, a light breeze swept through the quiet street. She could almost hear his voice again, gentle and sure. "Keep singing, Emily. The world still needs your song." 2 weeks after the benefit concert, Emily returned home to Portland for a brief rest. The city felt different now, quieter, slower, familiar in a way she hadn't realized she'd missed. She spent her mornings walking through the park where she and her mother used to feed the ducks, and her evenings on the small balcony where she once painted. Life, for the first time in years, felt peaceful. One morning, as she sifted through a pile of fan mail sent to her foundation, one envelope caught her eye. It was small, slightly crumpled, with handwriting that was uneven and slanted, as if written in haste or nervousness. The return address read, Liam T., 15 years old, Cleveland, Ohio. She sat at her kitchen table, a cup of tea beside her, and opened it carefully. The first line stopped her heart. "Dear Emily, I don't know if this letter will ever reach you, but I wanted to say thank you for saving my life." Her hands trembled slightly as she read on. "I saw your video when I was in the plane. Darkest place I've ever been. My dad left, my mom works nights, and I stopped talking to people at school. I thought no one would notice if I was gone. But then one night, I saw you singing Morning Comes. You looked scared, but you sang anyway. I don't know why, but I started crying. It felt like you were singing to me." Emily's breath hitched. Her eyes blurred as she read the next paragraph. "That night, I picked up my guitar. I hadn't played it in months. I played your song and sang it in the dark. I wasn't good, but it didn't matter. For the first time, I didn't feel alone. Thank you for showing me that broken voices can still make music. Thank you for helping me stay." The letter ended with one last line, written shakily across the bottom. P.S. When the morning came, I was still here. Emily pressed the paper to her chest, unable to speak. Tears rolled freely down her face as she whispered, "Oh, Liam." She sat in silence for a long time, listening to the sound of rain outside, her tea growing cold beside her. Later that evening, she took a picture of the letter and sent it to Keanu with a short message. "You need to see this." He called a few minutes later, his voice quiet on the other end of the line. "You okay?" Emily sniffled, wiping her eyes. "You should read it. It's everything." She read the letter aloud, her voice breaking several times before she finished. There was silence for a moment on the line before Keanu finally spoke. "That's what art does," he said softly. "It keeps people alive." Emily folded the letter carefully, her eyes still wet. "He's just 15, she whispered into the phone. "He almost gave up. And somehow, my voice reached him." Keanu's voice was gentle. "That's why we do it, Emily. Not for applause, not for headlines. For one person like him. For one moment like that. There was a pause, both of them lost in thought. Then he said softly, "You should write Tim back." "I will," she said, glancing at the envelope again. "But I also want to do something more. Something that lasts." A few days later, they met in Los Angeles at the Sing Anyway Foundation office. It was a small space, lined with framed photos from schools, hospitals, and music programs supported by their work. On the center table lay Liam's letter. Emily had brought it with her, folded neatly and placed in a glass frame. Keanu read the words again, in silence. When he finished, he exhaled deeply and looked up at her. "This letter," he said. "This is what art is supposed to do. It doesn't just entertain, it keeps people alive." Emily nodded slowly. "Then let's keep it alive. What do you have in mind?" She hesitated before answering. "A song. But not just any song. I want to bring back Morning Comes, the one that started it all. I want to record it again, but this time as a duet with you." He blinked, caught off guard. "With me?" She smiled faintly. "You said once that pain transforms when we share it. I think this could do that. We could use it to raise money for youth therapy centers. For kids like Liam." Keanu leaned back in his chair, thinking for a long moment. Then he smiled, slow and genuine. "All right," he said, "but only if you promise not to make me sound too good." She laughed. "The sound light and real. Deal." 2 weeks later, they were in a small recording studio, tucked away in the hills. It wasn't glamorous, just a single microphone, a piano, and two people who had both walked through silence and found their way back to sound. The first take began quietly. Emily sang the opening verse, her voice steady and soulful. Then Keanu's voice joined hers, low, gravelly, imperfect, but filled with emotion. Together, their tones intertwined, like two stories, finally meeting in the middle. When they reached the line, "The morning always finds its way," Keanu's voice softened, and Emily's lifted, carrying the harmony, with a kind of grace that felt both fragile and eternal. When the final note faded, the room stayed silent. No one moved. Then Keanu smiled faintly and said, "That's it. That's the one." Emily nodded, wiping her eyes. "Yeah," she whispered. "That's the one." The duet was released 2 weeks later under the title Morning Comes for Liam. All proceeds went directly to the Sing Anyway Youth Therapy Fund. Within days, the song topped charts not because of hype, but because it carried something rare: honesty. Liam's mother wrote to them a month later. Her note was short but full of warmth. "He's still singing. Every morning." Emily read the message aloud to Keanu, her eyes shining. "He's still singing," she said softly. Keanu smiled. Then we did something right. When Morning Comes for Liam was released, it didn't explode overnight. It bloomed, quietly. The song found its way into people's hearts, not through headlines or fanfare, but through whispers and word of mouth. Nurses played it softly in hospital corridors. Teachers used it in classrooms, before difficult conversations. Parents shared it with their children before bedtime. It wasn't just a song anymore, it had become a balm. Soon, people began posting videos again, just as they had when Sing Anyway first went viral. But these weren't performances for likes or attention. They were messages of survival. Veterans recorded themselves humming the chorus from hospital beds. Children recovering from illness sang it softly beside IV poles. Choirs of students performed it in gymnasiums, their voices imperfect but full of hope. Each post ended with the same line: "Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's singing through it." Emily read those words one morning while scrolling through messages from fans. She sat on her hotel balcony in Kansas City, sipping coffee as the sunrise painted the sky gold. Below her, A small crowd had already begun to gather outside the venue for that evening's performance. She smiled, amazed by how far her journey had taken her from a silent stage to this, a movement built not on fame, but on healing. That night's concert was held in a modest theater, with wooden seats and no grand lighting. The tour had been her idea, a series of intimate shows across small towns, free of charge, focused entirely on connection. She sang not to impress, but to reach. Each night, before beginning, she told the crowd, "This isn't a performance, it's a conversation. Let's be brave together." As she began to sing Morning Comes, her voice echoed softly through the hall. The audience joined her for the final chorus, their voices blending into something larger than any one person could have created alone. When the song ended, applause filled the room, not thunderous, but heartfelt. Backstage, Emily packed up her guitar, tired but content. Then one of the crew members approached, her with a grin. "You'll never guess who's here," he said. She looked up, curious. "Who?" He pointed toward the side aisle of the theater. Through the open curtain, she saw him, Keanu, sitting quietly in the back row, dressed casually in a gray sweater and jeans. He wasn't surrounded by cameras or security. He was just there, watching. Emily smiled and shook her head. She whispered to herself, "Of course you came." After the show, Emily walked out to meet the small line of fans waiting near the stage door. Some carried programs, others small handwritten notes. She took time with each of them, listening, hugging, signing what they offered, not as a celebrity, but as someone grateful to be seen. When the last person left, she turned toward the empty seats, expecting silence. Instead, she saw Keanu still sitting in the same spot, hands clasped, a thoughtful smile on his face. She walked down the aisle toward him. "You didn't tell me you were coming," she said, softly. He shrugged lightly. "Didn't want to distract anyone. I just wanted to hear you sing." She laughed gently. "You've already heard me 100 times. Not like this," he said. "Every time you sing, it sounds like you're healing another piece of yourself and the world with it." Her eyes softened. "You always know what to say." "Only because I listen," he replied. "And because your voice reminds me what truth sounds like." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet of the empty theater wrapped around them like a memory. Emily set her guitar down on one of the seats and sat beside him. "Do you ever think about that first night?" she asked. "When I couldn't even breathe?" He nodded slowly. "All the time. You taught me something that night too. You reminded me that courage doesn't mean being fearless. It means doing something anyway, even when your hands are shaking." She smiled at that. That's the message now. Every school, every hospital, every radio interview, they all repeat it. Sing through the fear. It's become bigger than I ever imagined. "That's because it's real," Keanu said. "And real things last." The next few months proved him right. Morning Comes, for Liam, continued to ripple across the world, finding new life in unexpected places. A hospital in Boston adopted it as their morning anthem, playing it each day in the children's ward to start rounds with hope. A youth center in Detroit painted its lyrics across their wall. In a small school in Montana, a group of students launched their own Sing Anyway week, encouraging classmates to perform songs that scared them most. Everywhere she went, Emily saw pieces of her song living new lives. She performed in churches, libraries, and recovery centers, never grand venues, but always rooms filled with people who understood what it meant to keep going when it was hardest. She began to notice that people no longer looked at her like a star, they looked at her like a mirror. At one outdoor concert in Colorado, she finished her final song and heard a familiar voice call from the crowd, "Encore." She laughed and shaded her eyes from the sun. There, near the back, Keanu stood among hundreds of people, clapping and smiling. She couldn't help but grin. "You again?" she called out. He gave a small wave. "Always." Later that evening, as they packed up, Emily walked toward him. "You don't have to come to every show. You know," she teased. He smiled gently. "Maybe not, but every time you sing, it reminds me that the world still has music left in it." She looked down, then met his gaze again. "Then I'll keep singing until it does." He nodded, his eyes kind. "And I'll keep listening." They stood there as the night wind carried the echo of distant applause through the open doors. Their shared message carried quietly between them. Proof that courage and compassion, once shared, never truly fade. Spring sunlight poured over the quiet streets of Portland as laughter echoed from the corner of an old renovated community center. A large banner fluttered above the entrance, reading, "The Sing Anyway Youth Center, where every voice belongs." Families, teachers, and students filled the courtyard, holding small guitars, notebooks, and handmade signs painted with bright colors. On the walls surrounding the entrance, murals of musical notes intertwined with Emily's lyrics. "When my voice shakes, it still speaks truth, and even broken voices can still reach a heart." Inside, the air buzzed with excitement. Volunteers prepared tables with snacks and instruments, while a local children's choir practiced softly in the background. The grand opening of the first Sing Anyway Foundation Youth Center was about to begin, and Emily stood in the center of it all, trying to take in the moment. She walked slowly through the hallway, her fingers brushing against the painted lyrics that lined the walls. Each verse came from her songs, her pain, and her healing. And now, they belonged to the next generation. She paused in front of one wall that simply read, "When the morning comes, I'll still be here." The words made her chest tighten. She smiled softly and whispered, "We really made it, Mom." Outside, a crowd was gathering in the sunshine. Children from across the city sat cross-legged near the small wooden stage built for performances. Many held guitars that had been donated by the foundation's supporters. Near the front stood the familiar black banner of Sing Anyway. Now, not just a movement, but a place. A small boy tugged on Emily's sleeve and handed her a guitar pick painted with her initials. "My sister comes here to sing," he said proudly. "She says it makes her feel brave." Emily knelt to meet his eyes and smiled. "That's what singing does," she said. "It reminds us we're still strong." The boy grinned and ran back to join the group as the crowd began to quiet. The host stepped forward to the microphone and announced, "Please welcome the founder of the Sing Anyway Youth Center, Emily Dawson." Applause broke out, and Emily walked onto the small stage, dressed simply in a cream blouse and jeans. Her voice trembled at first as she greeted the audience, but she steadied herself with a deep breath. "I grew up just a few blocks from here," she began. "There was a time I thought I'd never sing again. But someone reminded me that fear doesn't mean we stop. It means we start." She looked toward the crowd and smiled warmly. "Today, this place isn't just about music. It's about giving everyone a chance to speak their truth, no matter how small their voice feels. Because sometimes, the softest voices are the ones that save lives." As the applause grew, Emily noticed someone standing quietly near the back entrance. Tall, calm, familiar. Keanu. Emily stepped down from the stage, weaving through the crowd toward the back of the courtyard where Keanu stood. He wore his usual modest smile, hands in his pockets, as the children around him showed off their guitars and ukuleles. A few of them whispered, recognizing him, but he gently pressed a finger to his lips, smiling, signaling them to keep the secret. When Emily reached him, he held something small in his hand. It glinted in the light. "You dropped this a long time ago," he said quietly. Her breath caught. It was her mother's locket, the one she'd worn the night of her first performance, the one she thought she'd lost during those early chaotic days of fame. The chain was new, polished, the clasp fixed. She stared at it, unable to speak. "How did you?" "I asked one of the crew members from the show to keep an eye out," Keanu said. "It took a while, but we found it. Figured it should come home. Tears welled up in her eyes as she took it from him, clutching it tightly. "You repaired it?" He nodded. "A friend helped. I thought maybe it could shine again, like its owner." She laughed softly through tears. "You really have a way with words." He smiled. "Only when they matter." Emily looked down at the locket resting in her palm. She opened it gently. Inside was the old photograph, her mother, smiling beside her as a little girl, both holding paintbrushes. The image was slightly faded, but it still carried warmth. "She'd be proud," Keanu said quietly, his voice almost lost beneath the hum of the crowd. Emily looked up, her voice trembling but certain. "I finally believe that." The event organizer called everyone together for the ribbon cutting. Children rushed to the front, holding guitars and tambourines. Emily and Keanu stepped beside them. A pair of oversized scissors gleamed in her hand as she looked out over the crowd. Neighbors, teachers, friends, and countless young faces full of hope. "This center," Emily said into the microphone, "isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who ever thought they had nothing to give. Every voice, every song, every word of courage lives here now." Keanu placed his hand over hers on the ribbon. Together they cut it. The audience erupted in applause as confetti fluttered in the sunlight. Moments later, one of the children began strumming the opening chords of Morning Comes. The others joined in, their small voices rising together. Emily glanced at Keanu and smiled. "You still remember the harmony?" He chuckled softly. "Only one way to find out." They began to sing, their voices blending easily, filled with a kind of peace that comes only after long storms. The crowd joined in, parents, teachers, and kids turning the courtyard into a chorus. As the final verse filled the air, "When the morning comes, I'll still be here." Emily closed her eyes and lifted her face to the sun. The song ended, but the echo lingered, soft and lasting. In that moment, surrounded by voices and light, she knew her story had come full circle. The stage was empty again. The same studio where more than a year ago, a trembling young woman had frozen in front of the world, now sat silent beneath morning light. Dust drifted lazily through the air, catching the gold of the rising sun. The old "Next Big Star" sign hung above the stage, faded but still glowing faintly. The piano that once sat untouched was now open, a sheet of music resting on it. Morning Comes. The pages fluttered softly in the breeze from a cracked window. In the stillness, a familiar sound began to play. It was Emily's voice, recorded from her first performance, fragile and trembling yet filled with raw truth. "No one here needs to hear a perfect voice," she said. "They just want to hear your heart." The words echoed through the empty space, lingering like a ghost of courage reborn. As her voice faded, the camera moved slowly across the stage floor, where a single guitar leaned against a stool. The same stool where Keanu had once sat beside her. Sunlight traced its shape, making the wood glow softly. Then, another voice began to speak. It was Keanu's, steady, warm, and reflective. "Sometimes kindness doesn't look like a grand gesture," his voice said. "Sometimes it's quieter. It's staying beside someone long enough for them to find their voice again." The scene shifted to a montage. The Foundation's youth center alive with sound and laughter. Children strumming guitars and singing off-key, but smiling wide. Emily stood among them, her hair swept back, her locket catching the light as she helped a young girl adjust her microphone. Keanu's voice continued, softer now. What started as one voice trembling in fear became a movement of thousands singing through their pain. Because bravery isn't loud, it isn't flawless, it's honest. The montage grew. Veterans in hospital wards singing softly to the rhythm of monitors. Classrooms filled with music. Families humming Morning Comes together at kitchen tables. The song played beneath it all, not as a performance, but as a shared heartbeat. Emily's voice returned, gentle and full of life. Every song I've ever written came from silence. The kind of silence that hurts. But now, when I hear others singing, I realize that silence was never the end. It was just the pause before the first note. The camera returned to the empty stage. The sunlight was brighter now, spilling across the microphone stand where she once stood. A soft wind rustled the curtains as if carrying the echoes of her courage. Then, from off-screen, a single note began to play slow, clear, resonant. It was Morning Comes. Again. Keanu's voice whispered the final reflection. We all have a song inside us. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes broken, but it's still there waiting to be heard. As the final piano note lingered in the air, the camera slowly drifted toward the audience seats. They were empty now, rows of faded red velvet glowing in the sunlight. The silence wasn't lonely anymore. It felt peaceful, like the world finally taking a breath after a long storm. On the stage, a young child stepped into frame, a girl no older than 8, holding a small guitar, almost as big as she was. She looked around curiously, her steps light. She climbed onto the same stool where Emily had once sat, adjusting the microphone awkwardly. Her small fingers strummed a few soft chords, uncertain but brave. She sang one line, her voice quiet but steady. When my voice shakes, it still speaks truth. Her sound carried through the empty room, pure and unguarded. For a brief moment, it felt as though Emily's journey had come full circle, her courage living on through another's beginning. Keanu's voice returned, calm and introspective. The truth is, we all begin afraid. We all face moments when silence feels safer than speaking, when the fear of failing feels stronger than the ready hope of trying. But somewhere inside us, there's always a spark. And when someone believes in us, that spark becomes a song. The camera panned upward to the old stage lights above, where dust and sun met in a swirl of gold. Footage faded into scenes from real life. A young boy singing in a hospital room while a nurse clapped along. A classroom of children painting their own Sing Anyway murals. And a group of adults sitting in a therapy circle humming together. Across these images, Emily's voice layered softly, singing the final chorus of Morning Comes. When the morning comes, I'll still be here. Her words rose and fell with emotion, accompanied by glimpses of people from around the world, each one finding their own voice in ordinary places. The final images slowed. Keanu standing outside the youth center, watching through a window as a group of kids sang with laughter. Emily sitting by the same window, strumming quietly, her repaired locket glinting in the sunlight. Keanu's narration returned for the closing words. Kindness doesn't end when the moment does. It ripples quietly, endlessly through the lives it touches. What you say, what you give, even what you believe in, it can save someone you'll never meet. The music faded into silence. The stage reappeared one last time, bathed in the warm light of afternoon. Across the screen appeared white text, simple and sincere. Sing Anyway. Beneath it, Emily's voice echoed again, that familiar trembling tone from so long ago. If you've ever been afraid to begin, remember, you don't need to be perfect. Just be brave. The camera faded to black. Then, in the quiet that followed, white letters appeared. If this incredible story moved you, share it with someone who needs courage today. And tell us in the comments, what's your song of hope? The piano returned for one last gentle refrain of Morning Comes, fading as the video closed. And as the music disappeared, the world that had once watched a girl freeze on stage now stood filled with voices, brave, imperfect, beautiful, singing anyway.